Hello, my name is Elisabeth Baines and I work on quality assuring and developing the 16 to 19 funding formula at the Education Funding Agency, the EFA. This film has details of changes for the funding formula for the 2015 to 16 academic year and an early indication of changes to the formula for 16 to 17 academic year. This film also has changes announced by Minister Bowles for the condition of funding for this academic year. The purpose of this film is to provide an overview of all the changes for 2015-16 academic year, concentrating on policy changes. There is a further film outlining the allocations timeline and data sources, that is, what the EFA are going to produce and when, and how we are using your data. There will be a link at the end of this film. Throughout the presentation, I will use the term institution to refer to all schools, all types of academies, further education and sixth form colleges, and charitable and commercial providers, unless there is something relating to a specific institution type, in which case I will state that clearly. 2013-14 saw a significant change to the funding formula, with minor changes in 2014-15, and for 2015-16 only a small number of further changes to ensure stability. For the 2014 to 2015 academic year allocations, the EFA reduced the funding for 18-year-olds, in that for full-time students the maximum funding would be the top part-time band, 450 to 539 planned hours funded at 3,300. For those institutions most affected by the reduction in funding rates for full-time 18-year-olds, to recognise this was announced late in the business cycle, a one-year cap was applied so that no institution lost more from the rate reduction for 18-year-olds than 2% of its EFA programme funding. The cap to losses has been applied to funding allocations for 2014-15 only and will not be paid in 2015-16. Transitional protection that was paid as a result of the 2010 spending review changes was paid for 4 years from 2011-12 and had its final year in 2014-15. Formula protection funding, or FPF, was introduced for 2013-14. I can now advise you of how it will be calculated for 2015-16. FPF is paid where funding per student is reduced as a consequence of the move to funding per student in 2013-14, compared with what you were funded for in 2012-13. The difference was paid as a funding per student amount for each student. It provides a 3-year period of stability, 2013-14, 2014-15 and 2015-16 academic years. This allows the institution to introduce changes so that the curriculum meets the principles of study programmes. If your earnings through the formula do not change, then your formula protection funding will also not change. But in most cases, your earnings through the formula will rise or fall to some degree from year to year. There are 3 ways your FPF can change for 15-16 relative to your formula. Firstly, your earnings from the formula can decrease. For example, if your retention rate goes down or you recruit fewer students, attracting disadvantage uplift, in which case your formula protection funding will remain at the same value per pound per student and your overall funding per student reduces. Secondly, your formula earnings can go up, for example, if your retention improves, in which case your FPF will go down as you have successfully converted your FPF into your earnings from the formula. Thirdly, your formula earnings can go up so that your funding per student is more than you got in 2012-13, in which case you no longer need the FPF and your formula will be paid in full. Further details for how formula protection funding will be implemented is included in the film outlining the allocations. You will receive details for your own institution in the institution statement that will be issued to most institutions in February. I will now explain the background to the policy around the Maths and English condition of funding, highlighting some recent flexibilities for this year, provide details for what is changing for the 2015-16 academic year, and further recent announcements regarding flexibilities. Achieving a good GCSE grade in both Maths and English helps students to progress to further study, training and skilled employment. Young people and adults should be entitled to study for well-recognised and credible national qualifications in Maths and English that open up opportunities and provide them with a solid foundation for further study, training or skilled work. GCSEs are widely valued by employers. The goal is to give as many young people and adults as possible who lack good qualifications in Maths and English the chance to take GCSEs in these subjects. In August 2013, the government introduced 16 to 19 study programmes following Professor Alison Wolf's review of vocational education. A core principle of study programmes is that any student who has not achieved grade A star to C in Maths and/or English GCSE by age 16 must continue to work towards achieving these qualifications. This policy became a condition of funding from the beginning of the 2014 to 15 academic year. This means that all students on study programmes, including 19 to 25-year-olds with a Statement of Special Educational Need (SEN), a Learning Difficulty Assessment (LDA), or Education and Healthcare Plan (EHCP) when available, who do not have a GCSE grade A star to C in Maths and English, are required to continue to work towards achieving these qualifications by studying for a GCSE or approved stepping stone qualification as part of their study programme. Where a student without a grade C GCSE is not studying GCSE or an approved stepping stone qualification, that student is removed from future funding allocations. For example, students that don't meet the condition of funding in 14-15 will be removed from allocations in 16-17. There will be very few students that are exempt from this requirement, but those that may be include students holding an equivalent qualification from overseas and some students with a learning difficulty that prevents them from studying for either a GCSE or any of the stepping stone qualifications. Where the exemption is on the grounds that a student's learning disability prevents them studying at this level, an evidenced assessment that the high-needs student cannot benefit from studying an approved Maths and English qualification by a professional in the education institution would be acceptable if and only if the student has a Statement of SEN, an LDA or an EHCP. This will be required for 2014 to 2015 and for 2015 to 2016. These students should still continue to study Maths and/or English at an appropriate level. Institutions should be prepared to justify their decision to EFA auditors and Ofsted inspectors. Where the exemption is on the grounds that a student's overseas qualification is equivalent to a grade A star to C GCSE, institutions are required to establish that the qualification is a suitable equivalent and that the student possesses the necessary competency in the subject in question. Overseas qualification equivalents are to be determined by using the UK's national agency responsible for providing information and opinion on academic, vocational and professional qualifications from across the world, the National Academic Recognition Information Centre, UK, NARIC. For 2014 to 15, those students who have attained a grade D GCSE, we would expect that they would be enrolled on a GCSE rather than a stepping stone qualification. For some individual students with a grade D, a GCSE might not be the most appropriate qualification for them to study, and subject to a diagnostic assessment, you may determine that in a small number of instances that a stepping stone qualification is best for that student. In July 2014, the Minister announced that from 2015 to 16, full-time students with a grade D must study a GCSE, and it will be introduced as a condition of funding from then. The condition of funding applies to part-time students with a grade D in either or both subjects, in that those students must continue to study maths and English, but it could be a stepping stone qualification level. The EFA funds any programme greater than 2 weeks in length. Some of these can be very short, for example 10 planned hours. These could be short one-off courses while in work, or in the evening or full-day release programmes. The condition of funding relates to students on all programmes, whether full or part-time. To ensure those that want to study small courses are not discouraged from doing so, the Minister for Skills, Minister Baines, has announced a flexibility relating to students on small part-time programmes. Any student without a grade C in maths and/or English will not need to continue to study the subject they do not have a grade C in if their study programme is 149 planned hours or less in an academic year. For all study programmes 150 planned hours or greater, they will need to continue to study maths and/or English at an appropriate level. A further flexibility is that in order to maintain an institution's ability to place students on qualifications that fully meet their individual needs, provider associations will be able to nominate additional qualifications for inclusion on the DfE approved list of stepping stone qualifications on behalf of their members. DfE will retain the right, in discussion with Ofqual, to reject any which are not robust and challenging. If you have any suggestions, please contact your provider association. Since the funding for 16 to 19-year-olds changed for academic year 2013 to 14 onwards, with the introduction of funding per student, all full-time students have been funded at the same basic rate. As some institutions had historically delivered programmes larger than the 600 hours the new rate funds, a subgroup of the Ministerial Working Group was tasked with reviewing the options for providing an uplift for large programmes when formula protection funding ceases. The last year that FPF is funded is 2015 academic year. In July 2014, Minister Baines announced that additional funding would be available to institutions to fund programmes that stretch and challenge their most able students. The additional funding will be a 10% uplift for students whose study programme includes and they achieve at least a grade B in 4 A-levels, and a 20% uplift for students that take and achieve at least a B in 5 A-levels. A 20% uplift for students that take and achieve 28 points in the full Level 3 International Baccalaureate. For vocational qualifications, only tech-level qualifications that are included in the Tech Bac will be eligible for the uplift and must include a Level 3 Maths qualification and the extended project. When the new tech level and core maths grading requirements come into effect for qualifications first awarded in 2017 to 2018, grade conditions will also be applied. The uplift is calculated on the size of the whole Tech Bac programme and will depend on the number of guided learning hours, GLH, of the tech level of qualifications and the chosen Level 3 Maths qualification. Full details for how the large programme uplift will be funded are being finalised for funding to be included in 2016-17 allocations. We will be publishing a fact sheet on the detail for how the large programme uplift will be implemented which will be included on gov.uk when all details have been determined. Details about programme's requirements are available on gov.uk. From 2016 to 17, specialist land-based provision will attract a programme weighting of 1.75. You will now find all our guidance and information on gov.uk. That concludes the summary for changes to 16 to 19 funding for 2014-15 and 2015-16, with a forward look to known changes for 2016-17. The EFA publishes a weekly e-bulletin in term time, so you can access the most up-to-date information regularly. You can view copies of the bulletin and register for updates on gov.uk. Finally, I trust this video has provided you with useful information. Thank you for listening. Should you have further questions, we would be happy to answer these for you. Please use the inquiry addresses provided on this slide.